Hi there. I'll be talking through a study that examined the relationship that task measures of cognitive and affective empathy share with a trait measure of emotion dysregulation. Based on prior work, which has largely examined the relationship between empathy and emotion regulation using self-report trait measures of both constructs, we predicted that emotion dysregulation would show a negative relationship with our cognitive empathy task and a positive relationship with our affective empathy task. We assessed cognitive empathy using a visual perspective taking paradigm called the director task, in which participants are presented with a shelving unit on which various objects are positioned. The so-called director is viewing the shelves from the opposite side to participants, and on each trial gives instructions to move a particular object to a new location. On experimental trials, there's a conflict between the director and the participants' perspectives. And participants must suppress their prepotent egocentric visual perspective in order to select the correct target object as opposed to the incorrect foil object. On control trials, there's no conflict between the director and participants' perspectives. We used eye tracking to capture participants' gaze behaviors, and our key metric of perspective taking ability, or cognitive empathy, was the relative proportion of gaze time on the target object versus the foil object on experimental trials. A higher value on this metric reflects better perspective taking ability. We assessed a fundamental process related to affective empathy using a spontaneous facial mimicry task. We used facial AMG to measure the activation of the zygomaticus and corrugator muscles, while participants passively viewed dynamic stimuli depicting happy and angry facial expressions. Our metric of affective empathy was the magnitude of change in congruent muscle activity, i.e. the zygomaticus for happy faces and the corrugator for angry faces. Higher values on this metric reflect greater affective empathy. Finally, trait emotion dysregulation was measured using the difficulties in emotion regulation scale short form version, henceforth referred to as the DIRS. In terms of the validation of these empathy tasks, we found the expected pattern of results in both cases. In the director task, response times were longer for experimental relative to control trials. Also, the proportion of gaze time on the target object relative to the foil object was lower for experimental relative to control trials. In the mimicry task, there was an increase in zygomaticus activation above baseline levels for happy faces, but not for angry faces. There was also an increase in corrugator activation for angry faces and a decrease in corrugator activation for happy faces. Regarding the primary question of the relationship that the metrics from these empathy tasks share with emotion dysregulation, as predicted, we observed a strong negative correlation between the director task metric and the DIRS, which suggests that greater perspective taking ability was associated with lower levels of emotion dysregulation. Contrary to our expectation, the mean overall spontaneous facial mimicry metric was not significantly related to the DIRS. However, when examining this separately for happy and angry faces, we observed that happy face mimicry showed no relationship with the DIRS, but mimicry of angry faces showed a strong negative relationship with the DIRS. This suggests that higher levels of trait emotion dysregulation were associated with reduced spontaneous mimicry of angry, but not happy facial expressions. Thanks for listening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.